It was the late summer of 1882, and the harsh winds of the American West swept through the plains with a relentless force. Nathaniel "Nate" Hawk had never been one to shy away from danger. A rancher by trade and a fighter by nature, Nate had built his life from the dust of the land. His cattle roamed free on the vast fields, and his home was a modest cabin perched on the edge of the world. Most men would have considered his life lonely, but Nate found solace in the quiet and the work that came with it. Nate's reputation in the nearby town of Deadwood was one of strength and courage. Over the years he had defended his ranch from bandits, rustlers, and even the occasional wild animal. No one dared mess with Nate Hawk. His hands were rough from years of hard labor, and his face was etched with the lines of a man who had lived through many battles, both in the open world and in the struggles of his heart. But it wasn't until the night of a particular raid that things would change. A group of ruthless men looking to take what didn't belong to them had attacked Nate's ranch. With their guns drawn and their intentions clear, they were ready to take Nate's cattle, his land, and his life. He fought them off with the fury of a man who had nothing to lose, but the battle left him severely injured. When the fight was over, Nate was alone, lying in the dirt, blood soaking his shirt and his vision fading. He had made sure the raiders would not return, but now it seemed the land had taken its toll on him. The world around him grew darker, and he fell into unconsciousness. The next thing he knew, he awoke to the smell of herbs and the soft rustle of the wind. His body ached and his head throbbed with pain. For a moment Nate thought he had died and was now in some strange place between life and death. But as his eyes slowly opened, he saw the warm light of a fire and the shadow of a figure standing nearby. The figure was a woman, tall and graceful, with dark hair flowing down her back like the night sky. Nate tried to speak, but his throat was dry, and the words wouldn't come. The woman noticed his struggle and quickly moved to his side, offering him a cup of water. As the cool liquid slid down his throat, he looked up at her with curiosity. "Where am I?" he rasped. The woman smiled gently, her voice calm and soothing. "You are safe now, Mr. Hawk. You are in the land of the Apache." Nate blinked, confusion filling his mind. The Apache? He had heard many stories of the fierce warriors who roamed the land, fighting for their people and their rights. He had always thought of them as enemies, but as he looked into the woman's eyes, he saw no hostility, only kindness. "You saved me?" Nate asked, his voice filled with awe. The woman nodded, her eyes softening. "I am Ayana. My people found you wounded on the plains. I brought you here to my camp to heal." Nate tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness hit him, forcing him back down onto the soft blankets. "I didn't mean to intrude," he murmured. Ayana shook her head. "You are no intruder. We protect those who are in need, whether they are friends or strangers." Nate couldn't understand it. The Apache had always been painted as the enemy in the stories told by settlers and soldiers. He had grown up hearing about the wars, the battles, and the bloodshed. But here, in this peaceful camp surrounded by the beauty of nature, he found something entirely different. The Apache people were not the savages he had been led to believe. They were strong, proud, and deeply connected to the land. As the days passed, Nate recovered under Ayana's care. She taught him about her people's ways, their respect for nature, their deep spiritual beliefs, and their commitment to protecting their land. She spoke of the struggles the Apache had faced as settlers continued to push westward, claiming more and more of the land that belonged to her people. Nate listened intently, his heart heavy with the weight of the knowledge she shared. He had never considered the perspective of the Apache, and he began to realize that they were not the enemy at all. Instead, they were simply trying to survive in a world that was rapidly changing. Ayana's beauty was undeniable, but it was her spirit that truly captivated Nate. She was strong, confident, and determined, with a fierce loyalty to her people. Her soft laughter brought light to the camp, and her wisdom seemed endless. Nate found himself drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain. There was a connection between them that went beyond words. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ayana and Nate sat by the fire, sharing a meal. The stars above them twinkled brightly, and the crackling fire cast shadows on their faces. Ayana spoke of her father, Chief Black Thunder, and the struggles he faced in leading the Apache people. She spoke with such reverence for him that Nate couldn't help but admire the strength of her family and her culture. "Your father sounds like a great leader," Nate said, his voice thoughtful. Ayana smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes. "He is. But the world is changing, Nate. Our way of life is being threatened by those who wish to take our land. My father is trying to protect us, but the settlers grow bolder each day. Nate nodded. He had seen the tension between settlers and the Apache. He had seen the destruction caused by the battles, the lives lost on both sides. But he had never considered the cost to the Apache people, their land, their culture, their very way of life. You know, I never thought about it that way, Nate said quietly. I always thought we were just fighting to survive. But now I see, we're all fighting for the same thing. Ayana's gaze softened as she looked at him. Yes, we all want to protect what is ours. The night grew colder and Ayana stood up to stoke the fire. As she did, Nate felt a sense of unease in the pit of his stomach. The peace of the moment felt fragile, like a thread about to break. He could sense that trouble was brewing, that things were about to change in a way that neither he nor Ayana could predict. Just as Ayana was about to speak again, the sound of hooves pounding the earth reached their ears. A group of riders appeared on the horizon, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Ayana's expression hardened as she saw who they were. They are not Apache, she said in a low voice. They are settlers. They've come for something. Nate's heart raced as the riders drew closer. He had a bad feeling about this, a sense of danger that couldn't be ignored. Ayana turned to Nate, her eyes serious. Stay here and do not move. I will handle this. Nate wanted to protest, but before he could say a word, Ayana was already moving swiftly toward the riders. He watched her disappear into the darkening landscape, his thoughts racing. Who were these settlers and what did they want with the Apache? As the riders approached the camp, Nate felt a growing sense of tension. He knew something was about to happen, but he didn't know what. He only hoped that Ayana would return unharmed, and that the peace they had built together wouldn't be shattered. Part 1 ends as Nate prepares for whatever confrontation may come, uncertain of what the future holds but determined to protect the land and the woman who had saved his life. Nate stood still, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched Ayana move with quiet confidence toward the approaching riders. The sun had disappeared behind the horizon, and the sky was now a deep shade of purple, casting an eerie glow over the Apache camp. The riders were getting closer, their shadows stretching long in the dimming light. A feeling of unease gripped Nate as he took a step forward but quickly stopped himself. Ayana had told him to stay put, and he knew better than to disobey the wise and strong woman who had saved his life. As Ayana approached the group of riders, her every movement was calculated, like that of a hunter preparing for a crucial strike. She had already placed herself between the camp and the riders, her stance calm but firm. The riders halted a short distance away, and the air between them grew thick with tension. Nate couldn't hear the words being exchanged from where he stood, but he could see the expressions of both sides, Ayana's unshakable calm and the riders' uncertainty. The riders were clearly settlers, dressed in worn-out clothes and hats that spoke of hard labor. Their horses were tired, and their faces were lined with the exhaustion of long travels. One of the settlers, a tall man with a thick beard, spoke, his voice gruff and demanding. Nate could see Ayana's shoulders stiffen in response, but she remained silent, listening carefully to the man's words. I'm looking for the chief, the bearded man called out, his voice harsh and low. We need to talk. We got business and we ain't leaving until we get it sorted. Ayana's response was quiet but firm. You are speaking to the chief's daughter. What is it that you want? The man gave a snort of disdain. Your father's land is ours now and we want it peaceful like. If you don't give up your rights to it, we'll take it. There's no use in fighting. This is the way things are going. Nate's fists clenched at his sides as he overheard the words. His gut twisted with anger. The settlers were trying to force their way onto Apache land. They had no right to take what didn't belong to them, and Nate knew that if the Apache were to give in, they would lose everything. Ayana's calm demeanor did not falter. The land does not belong to you, nor will it ever. We protect what is ours. The settler's face twisted with anger, and he spurred his horse forward. You don't understand, girl. The government has already made their decision. You're too stubborn to see that. Ayana didn't move an inch as the man neared her. She held her ground, her eyes filled with determination. My people have lived on this land long before you or the government came. We will not leave. The tension in the air was thick, and Nate could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he couldn't just stand by and watch Ayana face these men alone. His feet moved before he had time to think, and he found himself stepping toward the riders. Ayana saw him approach, her eyes narrowing, but she didn't stop him. She knew Nate had a sense of justice, and she respected his decision. The settlers, however, saw him as nothing more than another obstacle to their plan. "What's this?" the bearded man scoffed. "Another settler come to fight for the Apache?" Nate shook his head. "I'm no settler, but I won't stand by and watch you take what doesn't belong to you. These people have the right to live in peace." The man's expression turned sour. "You'll regret this, mister. We've got numbers, and we ain't afraid to use them." Ayanna stepped forward, her hand raised to signal peace. "There is no need for violence. We do not wish to fight, but we will protect our land. Leave now, and there will be no bloodshed." For a moment, the man seemed to hesitate. Nate could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to decide whether to push further or to walk away. But before anyone could react, a voice broke through the silence. "Enough." The voice was deep and commanding, and it belonged to Chief Black Thunder, Ayanna's father. He rode into view, his presence instantly commanding respect. His face was scarred from years of battle, but his eyes were sharp and wise. He had the air of a man who had seen both victory and loss in his life, and his authority was undeniable. The settlers shifted uneasily, and the bearded man's face turned pale as he looked at the Apache chief. The power of Black Thunder's presence seemed to weigh heavily on the men, making them second-guess their decision. "You dare come onto our land and demand what is not yours?" Chief Black Thunder said, his voice like thunder rolling across the plains. "I have seen men like you before. You take what you believe is yours, and you destroy everything in your path. But not here. Not now." The bearded man sputtered, trying to find words, but Chief Black Thunder's unwavering gaze silenced him. "Leave or face the consequences." For a moment, the settlers stood frozen, caught between fear and pride. Then, with a snarl, the bearded man motioned for his group to retreat. They turned their horses and fled without another word, their boots kicking up dust as they left the Apache camp behind. Nate let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His heart was still racing, but the immediate danger had passed. Ayanna stepped beside him, her eyes filled with gratitude and something else. Something deeper that he couldn't quite place. "Thank you, Nate," Ayanna said softly, her voice gentle but strong. "You stood with us even when you didn't have to." Nate shrugged, his face a little flushed. "I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." "You've saved my life, Ayanna. It's the least I could do." Ayanna smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "It's not just about saving lives. It's about protecting what is ours. We can't let them take it from us." Nate nodded, understanding the weight of her words. This wasn't just about land, it was about pride, heritage, and survival. Ayanna's people had been fighting for their way of life long before Nate had ever come into the picture, and he knew now that their struggle was far from over. As the night settled in, Chief Black Thunder joined them by the fire. He offered Nate a seat, and they all sat together in silence for a time, the crackling of the fire the only sound breaking the stillness. "Nate Hawk," the chief finally spoke, his voice calm but resolute. "You have shown great courage in standing with my daughter and my people. In this land, we do not take alliances lightly. If you are to stay here, there are things you must understand. This land is sacred. It is the blood and bones of our ancestors. If you are to stand with us, you must respect our ways and fight for our future." Nate looked at Ayanna, then back at the chief. He had never considered himself a fighter for a cause beyond his own survival. But here, with Ayanna and her people, he felt something stir inside him, a sense of belonging and purpose that he had never known before. "I will fight," Nate said, his voice steady and strong. "I will fight for your people and for this land." Ayanna's eyes softened as she met his gaze. There was no longer doubt in her heart. She knew that Nate had found his place here, not just as a man who had saved her life, but as someone who had chosen to stand with the Apache in their fight for freedom and survival. As the fire flickered and the stars twinkled overhead, a new chapter in Nate's life began. He had come to the West as a lone rancher, but now he stood united with the Apache, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would protect their land, their people, and their future.